Chapter 1, December 15, 1991. It has been a long couple months, no doubt. Jake said as he took a sip from the bottle. It's going to feel good having all of us rest and lay low this winter. Just 3 more days, my friend, then we're home for break. I replied, taking the bottle back from Jake. No parents, no verdict, no responsibilities. I'm getting wet thinking about it, Forrest. Jake stated while we both chuckled to ourselves, trying not to be too loud. We sat in the handicap bathroom stall for a few more moments, passing the bottle back and forth. The steam from our breath ascended in the cold ambient air. The lights did not work. We could see the dense fog from the broken panel window above us. I'm going to head back to class, don't want Mr. Dipshit to find us again, Jake said as he wiped his mouth. He then sprayed himself with cologne and shoved about 10 mints in his mouth. I'll be there in a few minutes, man, I replied, taking another swig. I locked the stall door as he exited the bathroom. I sat back down against the wall by the toilet, staring at the drawings on the inside of the stall's wall. I could hear the wind blowing past the open bathroom door. The broken tiles are covered in slush and mud. I began to hear someone talking from a distance. It grew louder and closer until I heard footsteps enter the bathroom. From the voice alone I could tell it's Jessica. Jessica is in special needs classes and seems to be one of the more adventurous, mentally challenged students on campus. Is that you? Is that you, my friend? Hello, sir. Jessica said with a smile as she stared at me through the crack in the stall door. I figured it was time to leave. I walked out of the stall and over to the sink to wash my hands. Jessica stood behind me staring at me through the mirror. Jeg, Elskadeg, Min Konga. I like your crown, Jessica said playfully through the reflection. Let's go back to class, I said as I dried my hands. Why don't they listen? Min.Elska. Why? Jessica said under her breath. As we exited the bathroom we walked under the awnings that hung over the pathway, across the campus, and through the hall until we found ourselves at room 301. I'm not proud of the staff associated with 301. Shitty fact about our school is that they are special needs teachers may not be 100% qualified to teach the classroom. There are supposed to be 1 staff member for every 3 children. We have 2 teachers and 23 students in 301. 23 students that require special care, some more extensive than others. I question if the students are receiving adequate care at all. Jessica's disabilities were not as severe as the others, but that is no excuse for her to be across campus. She was not supposed to leave here unsupervised. After I brought her back, I continued down the hall until I was in front of my classroom door. As I reached for the knob, I heard the tone sound from the hall speakers. This usually happened before someone came through to speak. Forrest Alamos to the front office, Mr. Alamos to the front office. Fuck. It was the last class of the day. It was the last 20 minutes. What the fuck could they want? I walked out of the building, through the cafeteria, and into the administration office. Hey, I was called in, I said to the lady at the front desk. Mrs. B wants to have a word, she replied, passing me 2 pieces of gum. You need to control that, sir, she added with a smile. I smiled back as I threw the wrappers in the bin. I walked down the hallway and into her office. Shut the door, please, Ms. Bringston said as she took a seat at her desk. I'm going, to be honest, ma'am, and pardon me for being rude, but why have I been in here 3 times this week? Would you rather be in class, Mr. Alamos? She said as she maintained eye contact with a small grin. Is that Brandy? She added with a curious glare. She did not seem to be mad. She walked over to the bookshelf and removed a novel from the row. Behind it was a fancy glass. Don't be rude, my boy, pour this lady a glass, she said, walking over to my chair. Mrs. B, are you sure? I mean... Stop, you're fine, she interrupted while I took the bottle from my backpack. I poured her glass, then handed it back. We made small talk for a few minutes, talked about my classes, my grandparents, what I want to do after high school. As she began to speak, her expression and posture slowly changed. Her voice got softer, her glare was full. Forgive me, Forrest, she said, reaching into her drawer. Ms. Bringston placed a picture frame on the desk in front of her. Come, she said as I walked over to the photo. I stood next to her chair looking down at the desk. She placed her hand over mine, struggling to smile. The photo was of a young boy standing next to a young Ms. Bringston and 2 men, one old and tall, the other a barrel-chested man with a long mustache. All 4 were standing in front of a large, Three-story brick building facing the camera for a photo. The sign next to them said Willow Creek State Educational Institution. When was this? I asked as I picked up the frame. Long ago, Forrest. Before you were born, she stated as she took out a small book from the drawer. I want you to have this, Forrest. I want you to take the photo in this journal. We must have a misunderstanding, Ms. Bringston. You're giving me this for what reason? I asked as I placed both objects on top of my backpack. Don't stop writing, Forrest, she responded. Her complexion transitioned very slowly from a near-pleasant smile to a face full of anguish. Her eyes told a story that didn't need words. Her bottom lip began to tremble. The bell rang. It was 2:13 p.m. and time to go home. Ms. Bringston, I have to go. Are you sure you want to give me these? I don't know what I'll do with them. Write for me, Forrest. Leave it on. Whatever you do, don't turn it off. Promise me, my dear, she said as she watched me put the frame and journal in my backpack. I then stood up behind my chair, gently pushing it in. Live a good story. Please, Forrest. Live a good story, she added. Yes, ma'am, I replied, still a bit confused. I'll see you soon, Forrest, she responded as she struggled to maintain a smile. I'll see you soon, Ms. Bringston, I responded as I shut the door behind me. I walked past the front desk and out the door, onto the sidewalk towards the parking lot. The sky was dark from the thick cloud that had crept in. It was 11 degrees today and has been snowing on and off since late October. The fog was dense but beginning to lift as the wind picked up. Our school is at an 8,750 feet elevation in a town called Northridge. The highest in elevation along with the most history. Northridge is the main town on the mountain with a few small communities scattered over the range. The forest of tall thick pines stretches endlessly across all neighboring counties. It is the coldest from November to early March, and in December to early February, the temperature regularly drops below zero. The ice and snow gets so bad that majority of the time we go out we must wait on the snowplows to clear the one road leading down the mountain. Every town on the range is engulfed by tall eastern white pine trees, sometimes 75 feet tall. The land itself has a long history and houses some of the tallest moose and elk in the north. There wasn't too much snow on the ground yet, so I wanted to get to my truck as soon as I could before it started coming down heavy. I forgot my gloves and putting chains on would be literal hell. I walked a couple more yards before rounding the corner into the main parking lot. Ashton was standing under a streetlight in the parking lot next to a couple of cars. Black snow boots, thin black pants with an old ski jacket. She has long, straight black hair, soft lips, white teeth, and a small button nose. She is thin, with a dark, elegant aesthetic. She plays the piano beautifully and is a great photographer as well as an artist. Ashton is quiet but her eyes will speak for her. She has a delicate touch and no fear of confrontation or eye contact. She can be very intimidating to others that don't know her just from her background alone, but once you know her, if she lets you, you'll find she's has one of the most caring and elegant souls. She has a soft and calm tone but can be very direct and quite blunt. She is highly intelligent and doesn't entertain bullshit. She listens to records rather than cassettes. She loves the configuration of spiderwebs. I have not seen fear in her other than the day I met her. Last year around this time I was homeless in Merlot, the bustling city at the base of the mountain. I were completely miserable, and lost. I had reached a point in my life where I was giving up. I had no parents to disappoint, I had ruined my relationship with my grandparents and did not have a home. I felt there was no one I was letting down, and I can tell you most of my situation was self-induced and stemmed from me not taking care of my thoughts. I was on my way to play chicken with a train when I walked under an overpass on my way to the subway. This is where I met Ashton, sitting on the floor alone, with a cup and a sign that read, "No money, need change." We did not say a word to each other for the first 72 hours, we were both in the low and in pretty rough shape. We simply followed one another around town, showing each other the spots we would go to escape the busy city. My favorite was a rooftop overlooking Main Street and 7th. Hers was behind a billboard at the start of Main Street and the end of Jericho, a small trek up the base mountain and onto the side of the road. The view she had was breathtaking. One night we climbed the billboard and polished off a bottle of red wine. That was when she put her head on my shoulder for the first time. We watched the cars flow through the crowded streets while we listened to the sounds of Merlot. The following night we climbed back up with more wine and donated French bread from one of the Italian shops. I heard her speak for the first time that night. The tone, the way she pronounces her words. "I love you, Forrest," she said as she grabbed my hand. That was all she said, and when I said it back, the smile never seemed to leave her. Her presence alone made me want to fix things with my grandfather. After we found a payphone, I made a call. After Ashton and I panned enough money, we saved up enough to take a taxi home the following month. My grandparents' home is in a little neighborhood halfway down the mountain between Northridge and Merlot. This was the house I grew up in. Immediately after I came back home I mowed lawns and delivered groceries to old people to get the money to get Ashton clothes, menstrual supplies, and anything else she needed. We made the decision to put her in Northridge's education system once we were on our feet again. Ashton is not just a girlfriend. I don't think she ever was. She walked up and wrapped her arms around my neck before kissing me. "I missed you," she said with a smile. "I missed you too, darling." We began walking towards the truck, through the lot. Ashton brought out 2 cigarettes from her bag and lit them both as we made our way through the fog. "Thank you," I said, taking the cigarette from her lips. "You're welcome, my love," she responded after taking a drag. We walked along the building, on the sidewalk under the dim light street lights until we reached our cars. Jake and Kendall were standing in front of their Jeep. "What's the plan, bitch boy?" I said aloud. "Let me get a grit, man," he responded with his hands together like a poor Renaissance tradesman. He lit his cigarette and took a hit before handing it to Kendall. "Let's meet at my house tonight, we can use the living room," Jake added. So Jake is my best friend, he is like my brother. Jake is slim just like me and 4 inches taller. Skinny jeans and usually wears a band shirt, but today he is in a ski jacket. Jake and I have known each other since we were 5 and have lived down the street from each other ever since I can remember. He has a deep voice and a good sense of humor. He's always doing whatever the fuck he wants. Sits on furniture, lights cigarettes indoors. There was a point in our lives we would cut out stencils we traced onto construction paper. The Joker's hat was our favorite. Late at night we would sneak out and paint the stencils onto businessmen's houses. We also fucked with politicians. If they were a pedophile, we would throw rocks at the house and do what we could to the car windows. When Jake finally made things official with Kendall, she started coming with us. Kendall is Jake's girlfriend. She has been in our little family for many years but has been with Jake for 3 years now. Kendall ran away from home 3 years ago and has been with Jake ever since. She is the most daring out of all of us. She doesn't care about the law at all but is still very polite and classy when she needs to be. I've seen Kendall get into fights at school with girls that flirted with Jake. She is very pretty and has a little attitude with the adults majority of the time. She is one of us. She has dark hair and is also slim but a little taller than Ashton. She is 18 like the rest of us but is also the oldest out. She paints just like Ashton, but Ashton is the better artist in my opinion. From afar we saw 2 other figures approach from the dense fog. It was Ed and Taylor. Taylor is Jake's younger sister. She is only 1 year younger than us. She also has dark hair and bright eyes just like Jake. Taylor is very pretty and attracts a lot of attention that she doesn't want. Jake is constantly getting in the faces of the juniors. Taylor is strong-willed and also has a sense of elegancy but is very forward when she speaks. She has been with us for as long as Jake has. They always were a pair as kids. It's pretty cool that she comes with us on investigations. It's not common finding girls here at Northridge that like to venture into the forest, but we have 3. Ed is the 3rd guy in our family. I met Ed the same time I meet Jake. We all grew up in our neighborhood together. Ed is very smart, defiantly the most intelligent out of all of us. He is slim and lanky with large hands. Sometimes he wears glasses. He has a sharp jaw and dark hair. Ed is a real fun guy to be around and is always down to do some sketchy shit. He has a deep interest in the paranormal just like all of us, but he is the one to do most of the research. It is Tuesday and we are 3 more school days away from winter break. Something like 16 days off from school. I cannot fucking wait. The snow began to come down harder than before. "What time do you want to meet at your house, Jake?" Ed asked, walking over to his dad's car. 7, everyone come over at 7, Jake said as we all slowly walked over to our cars. Jake, Kendall, and Taylor all piled into Jake's Jeep. Ed to his dad's Blazer, and I was in a 1972 4x4, Chevy. Black, with light brown leather interior and a bench seat. This fall I was finally able to put off-road tires on the truck so we can make it on the back roads. The center console had a binder full of CDs next to a box full of cassettes. Ashton took a drag as she loaded a Ramones tape into the slot. We continued out the school parking lot, and on to Jericho. Only 3 more days until winter break. We were all excited to be going home. My grandparents left last night. They are going to be gone until New Year's Eve. Ed's father travels for work and won't be home until after Christmas. Jake and Taylor's mom won't be home until the 3rd of January. We had 3 separate houses all to ourselves for the next few weeks. We drove down Jericho for 11 miles until we reached our turn. Ashton and I took a left onto Tavern Road while Ed and Jake went straight. After school Ashton and I usually go to a cafe in North Oak. North Oak is an incredibly old town from the early 1900s that is tucked in the mountain. The main buildings and roads had been renovated, while other spots had been left alone since the settlers and miners left. There are about 2,000 residents, mostly Native American descendants. North Oak sits about 7 miles east, off Jericho. I'm glad not a lot of people come here. There's a ton of history I'm sure my generation won't appreciate. Some roads are closed off and considered vacant or abandoned. The center of the town is still active throughout the day and even more so at night. North Oak still has lamplighters. Good men that light the flame lamps along the streets. The snowplows aren't a part of any company. Just like our little neighborhood, North Oak has patrons that turn their old trucks into plows. After clearing the roads, North Oak's governor would write them a check. The snow piled up on the sides of the sidewalk, the payphones and yellow pages were frozen in place. The spot we go to is called the Diamond Cafe. A 2-story coffee shop with a balcony in the back that's encased in the woods. By far our go-to spot when we can't find anything to do. Jennifer is the owner's daughter and our favorite barista. She often will come over and tell us the drama in town. Her mother is a native and has told Jennifer all the tall tales of North Oak which she relays to us on occasion. Ashton ordered the lavender tea and I ordered a black coffee. We sat outside today. The fog was beginning to settle into the trees once again. Only Ashton and I were in the shop. I wrote in my journal as Ashton read one of her many books she rents from the library. I grabbed a pipe from my backpack that my grandfather gave me, followed by a bag of string tobacco. I lit the cutty and continued writing until the sky got too dark and the snow began to fall harder. Eventually, Ashton and I piled into my truck and we continued our way home. The wind chill was beginning to get too much to handle. I began to feel Ashton's hand on the back of my neck as we took a left back onto Jericho. "I love you," she said softly as she watched me drive. I turned up the windshield wipers then grabbed her hand. "I love you too." Ashton sunk back into her seat and rested her legs on the dashboard. She squeezed my hand now and then to let me know she's there. "Grit?" she asked. "Yes ma'am," I responded. She proceeded to light 2 cigarettes. The clouds grew darker. The glow from the street lamps became a little dimmer. We reached a point where we saw flashing lights off in the distance. They looked like emergency lights from a couple of cars. The trees were very tall in this part of the forest, the settling fog was dense. We were on a road that ran straight through a small valley. We could see 20 feet ahead of us at most. The first car was a large white sedan. The hood, the axle, and the motor were pushed back into the front cab. The horn from one of the cars was stuck and maintained a constant tone that echoed through the trees. There was a large hole in the windshield with a lot of the glass pulled back. From afar it looked like the car was totaled. The emergency lights were reflecting off the snow. The road was blanketed in slush and was wet. Another car pulled up and turned on their emergency lights. As we approached, I saw the second car. A smaller sedan was mangled in the center of the road. The car was blue but the wheels and doors were almost unrecognizable. The top was caved in. The car had rolled a few times before coming to a stop. When we were about 150 feet away, Ashton and I agreed to pull over. We grabbed our flashlights and began making our way through the weather. We walked over to the first car, the white van with the broken windshield. I didn't know that was a body at first. He was scattered across the asphalt, 50 feet from the van. His carcass was unrecognizable. He flew through that window and died on the pavement. His left leg, his forearm, and half his head, all missing. His torso was ripped open, his contents were scattered across the road, his eyes were open. Ashton jumped into the front seat of the van and put it into park. That's when she noticed the little girl in the front seat. The second person that pulled up to help called 911. After she got off the phone, she came over to help us with the girl. She was staring forward, fixed on the body on the road in front of her. The glow from the emergency lights illuminated her father's corpse as they flashed. She was bleeding from both ears, a section of her head next to her eye socket was pulsating. She had a severe skull fracture. The bones in her forehead were noticeably broken but her skin was still intact. The woman brought her to the ground before she began seizing. She violently shook back and forth as fluids poured from her mouth. The woman proceeded to give CPR. Her body rocked violently back and forth, as the woman gave deep compressions. Ashton and I began running over to the second car in the center of the road. The fenders were all over the road, glass was everywhere, the radio was still playing. We walked over to the driver's side of the car. Someone had taken the headrest off the seat. The airbag deployed. There was nothing to keep the woman's head from folding over the seat. Her contorted body sat in the front, her head and neck had been stretched into the back seat. Her vertebrae, and tissue exposed by our flashlight. We opened the back door, her face was pale, her eyes were open, the radio continued to play. I know that face. Ms. Bringston, the parking pass belonged to our school. The back of her head was wide open, the contents had spilled onto the back seat. As we walked around the car, we began to hear the radio switch stations. I reached over her body and pulled the keys out of the ignition. The woman tending to the girl in the front seat of the white car was crying loudly. Sirens could be heard from a distance. The fire department showed up first, followed by 2 ambulances, the battalion chief, and a second fire engine. The department ended up taking over CPR on the girl. They loaded her on the gurney and continued CPR en route to Northridge Hospital. 2 firefighters rode in the back of the ambulance. We gave our report to the police, collected ourselves the best we could, and got back into the cab. We were quite most of the way home. Ashton's hand crept up into mine as we rounded the corner onto our street. The low cloud had lifted, there was still some light out. "Let's talk about this once we get inside please, my love," she said, squeezing my hand. "Of course, I agree," I responded, pulling into the driveway. We gathered our things and made our way into the house. "Did you feed Grim this morning?" Ashton asks, walking into the kitchen. "Of course I did, sweetheart," I responded. "Grim is our pup. Has grown a lot in the past few months, he's something like 140 pounds now. The vet said something about how his dad was a timber wolf, and his mom was a Malamute. I'm not sure what that makes Grim, but he is the goodies of boys. He very tall with large paws and ears with an abnormally long tail. He is black and gray with one blue eye and one orange eye. He is easily taller than me when he stands on his back legs. Ashton and I found him wandering near North Oak in October. Our vet said it is okay to keep him if we have no other pets and suggested we give him a rabbit every 2 weeks on top of his dog food. I have put a lot of time into Grim and now take him everywhere I go but school. He is very well trained and we have become accustomed to his nature." I took my coat and my shirt off, then laid on the bed. Ashton put her things down and laid with me as we looked up at the ceiling. She then wrapped her legs in mine and took a deep breath. "What's on your mind?" she asked. "I don't think I have words, baby. I want you to be okay," she responded. "I'll be okay, sweetheart. I saw her today. I was with her when the bell rang. I was in her office 3 times last week," I stated. "That's why your name was called today," Ashton said to herself. "She gave me some things I haven't gotten a good chance to look at. I'll bring them to Jake's house later." "That's in an hour. You sure you still want to go?" she asked. "It's going to come out eventually, I'd rather it be fresh." We laid in bed for about an hour staring at the ceiling. I did my best to settle my thoughts and get the images from tonight out of my head. After we talked about it, Ashton kissed my forehead and got up to go shower. The house phone began to ring. I wasn't going to pick up. The voicemail tone went off but no one left a message. The night was beginning to set in, the wind began to howl. The street lights gave off that dim yellow glow. The road is icy. There are no cars out. It's -9 degrees right now and I can only imagine the wind chill. I've been thinking non-stop about what Mrs. B said to me today. So I'm going to write. I'm going to leave this computer on from now on. I have a feeling in my stomach I never have before. Before she died, she told me to write. And I told her I would. I'm going to lay down and rest until Ashton gets out of the shower.